The twin suns of Varela hung low in the violet sky, casting their warm light over the lush, emerald forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was sweet with the scent of blossoms carried on the gentle breeze, a breeze that whispered through the palace corridors high above the shimmering lakes below. In every direction, Varela seemed to hum with life, a tranquil and peaceful world that had known no war for centuries. From the mighty mountains to the smallest village, all was harmony, all was peace ruled by wisdom, intellect, and the unwavering leadership of the queens. But peace, as it often does, came with its own quiet strain. Alara, the elder of the twin princesses, stood on one of the many terraces of the palace, her hands resting lightly on the cool stone balustrade. Her deep, amber eyes scanned the horizon as she lost herself in thought. The familiar landscape of Varela brought her little comfort these days, not with the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She was poised to inherit the throne one day, to take her mother's place as the ruler of the Varelian Empire, a vast network of planets and peoples united under one banner. It was an empire of prosperity, unmatched in its diplomatic strength and peaceful governance, but that didn't mean it was without danger. I can feel you brooding from all the way across the palace. Alara turned, her expression softening as her twin sister, Leora, approached. Though they were identical in appearance, both with cascading dark hair, smooth tawny skin, and the same striking eyes, Leora always seemed to carry a brightness, a spark of untamed energy that Alara often envied. I'm not brooding, Alara said, turning back to the view. I'm thinking. Leora's laugh was light and teasing. You think too much. And you don't think enough. Leora shrugged, sidling up to the balustrade beside her sister. Maybe. But it doesn't do much good to sit around worrying all day, does it? Someone has to, Alara replied, her voice a shade more serious now. Mother says the expansion will bring new challenges, new responsibilities. There are so many worlds beyond our reach, and we've barely begun to understand what we're up against. We've only ever known peace here on Varela, but the galaxy is unpredictable. Leora leaned in closer, her playful demeanor fading just slightly. You're worried about the Scrathi. Alara's jaw tightened at the mention of the name. The Scrathi were an alien faction known for their ruthless tactics, their thirst for conquest. The Varelian Empire had encountered them just a year ago in the outer reaches of their domain, and since then tensions had been quietly mounting. They're dangerous, and Mother is right, we know so little about them. Their technology, their culture, even their biology is a mystery to us. Leora gazed out at the distant horizon, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever wonder what else is out there? Beyond the Scrathi, beyond the stars we know, we've ruled this empire for so long, but there's still so much we don't understand. Alara glanced at her sister, seeing the flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Leora had always been the one to push boundaries, to ask questions that few dared to consider. It was both her strength and her greatest flaw. You sound like you want to leave. Leora grinned. Maybe I do, don't you? Alara smiled faintly but shook her head. I have responsibilities here, Leora. We both do. We are the future of this empire. You don't ever wonder, Leora pressed, a note of excitement in her voice. What lies beyond all this, what we haven't seen, maybe even what we've forgotten? Alara gave her sister a curious look. Forgotten? What do you mean? Leora hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking down to the floor, as if weighing whether to continue. The old stories, Alara, the legends. Alara's brow furrowed. You've been spending too much time in the archives. No, listen, Leora's voice grew more earnest, the teasing gone. I've been reading the ancient texts, the ones from before the unification. There are stories fragments really about a time when our people were different. Different how? Leora leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. There were men, Alara. Alara stared at her sister, waiting for the punchline, but Leora's expression was completely serious. That's impossible, Alara said after a moment. Men are myths, Leora, fairy tales told to amuse children. They were real once, Leora insisted. The texts talk about them, about how they lived alongside women, how they helped build the early civilizations of Varela. But then something happened and they disappeared. No one knows why. Alara shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. Those are just stories. Maybe Leora's gaze was intense, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of discovery. But don't you wonder why there's no record of them, why they were erased from our history? What if there's more to it? Before Alara could respond, a sudden blare of alarms cut through the palace air, loud and piercing. Both sisters turned, eyes widening as the ground beneath them trembled slightly. The calm serenity of the Varelian capital shattered in an instant, replaced by a rising panic. "What's happening?" Alara gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. Leora's face was pale as she looked around. "It's coming from the defense grid." A flash of light streaked across the sky, followed by the unmistakable roar of something breaking through Varela's outer atmosphere. Alara's blood ran cold. They had never been attacked, not in all their lifetimes. Varela was supposed to be a haven, a sanctuary untouched by war. But now the sky itself was on fire, and the air buzzed with the unmistakable tension of battle. "We need to get to the command center," Alara said, grabbing Leora's arm. But before they could move, the air around them shimmered, and a brilliant blue energy field erupted from the terrace floor. Alara barely had time to react before her vision was flooded with light, and the world around her seemed to tilt and spiral out of control. She felt her body go weightless, a strange sensation of being pulled apart and pushed together all at once. And then, in a flash, the light disappeared, and Alara found herself lying on a cold, metallic surface. The lush gardens of Varela were gone. The palace, the skies, the warmth of home, everything had vanished. In its place was the sterile, cold interior of what looked like a prison cell, its walls a dull silver, humming with a low electrical buzz. Alara groaned as she sat up, her head spinning from the sudden disorientation. Beside her, Leora was already on her feet, her eyes wide with panic. "Where are we?" Leora asked, her voice shaking. Alara's mind raced. The walls around them pulsed with energy, and there were no visible doors or windows, just the oppressive, metallic stillness of their enclosure. This wasn't just any prison. It was alien. "I don't know," Alara whispered, standing slowly. "But we're not on Varela anymore." As the twins exchanged a look, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They had been taken, ripped from their home by some unseen force. And now they were prisoners in a place they couldn't understand. Suddenly, a voice, mechanical and cold, echoed from the walls around them, subject secured, proceeding with Phase 1. Alara's blood ran cold as the meaning of those words became clear. They weren't just prisoners, they were part of something much larger, much more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. Leora's hand gripped hers, a gesture that was at once comforting and terrifying. "Alara, what do we do?" Alara didn't have an answer. For the first time in her life, she was utterly powerless. Stripped of her title, her authority, and her home, she had nothing to rely on but her wits and her will to survive. "We wait," Alara said softly, her mind already working through every possible escape route, every strategy. "And we stay together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." But as the cold, metallic walls seemed to close in around them, a small, terrifying thought crept into the back of Alara's mind. They were far from home, in the hands of a force they knew nothing about. And somewhere out there, in the vast, endless reaches of the galaxy, their fate was no longer their own. And for the first time in her life, Alara realized the stories Leora had been reading might not just be fairy tales, they might be warnings. The cold, metallic hum of the ship echoed in the silence, the sound so persistent it had already begun to burrow into Alara's mind like a curse she couldn't escape. The smooth walls of their cell, devoid of any cracks or seams, only amplified the oppressive atmosphere. Time had lost its meaning here. Hours, maybe days, passed with no indication of night or day. Leora, usually so full of life and energy, sat huddled in one corner of the room, her legs pulled tightly to her chest, staring blankly at the floor. Alara paced, her movements sharp and restless, every step a reminder of how helpless they were. "How long are we going to stay like this?" Leora's voice was small, a whisper barely audible over the hum of the ship. Alara stopped and looked at her sister. She didn't have an answer, not a real one. They'd been here wherever this was long enough for hope to feel like a fading memory. The Scrathi, or whoever their captors were, had not shown themselves since they'd been taken. No explanations, no demands, just silence and confinement. "I don't know," Alara admitted softly. Her voice was steady, though her insides twisted with uncertainty. "But we can't afford to give up. There has to be a way out." Leora lifted her head, her dark hair falling across her face. "What if they never come? What if this is all part of their plan to break us?" Alara knelt beside her, gently brushing the hair away from her sister's face. "We won't let them break us, Leora. Whatever they want, we can't lose ourselves." Leora's eyes searched Alara's for reassurance, but all they held was the determination of a leader, not a sister. It was the same resolve Alara had shown since they were children, the unwavering sense of responsibility she'd always carried. But here, in this cold, unknown place, even that strength felt fragile. Before Leora could respond, the room vibrated slightly, a low rumble that passed through the floor and up their legs, like the purr of a massive machine coming to life. Alara's head snapped toward the ceiling, listening intently. It wasn't the usual hum. This was something else, something new. Leora jumped to her feet, suddenly alert. "What is that?" Alara held up a hand for silence, her senses straining to catch every detail. The vibration intensified, growing louder, sharper, until it wasn't just a sound, it was movement. A tremor. The entire ship was shaking. "Get down," Alara grabbed Leora's arm and pulled her toward the corner of the room, shielding her as the walls around them groaned under the pressure of some unseen force. The sound of metal twisting and shuddering echoed in their ears, followed by a series of muffled explosions that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the ship. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The ship fell silent once more, though the air felt different now, tenser, like the calm before a storm. Leora's breath came in shallow gasps. What was that?" "I don't know," Alara whispered, her heart racing. "But something's happening." A hiss, sharp and metallic, broke the silence. Both sisters turned toward the source, the far corner of their cell, where a previously invisible seam had formed in the wall. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the wall slid open, revealing a sliver of the corridor beyond. Cool, artificial light flooded the cell, illuminating the sterile, metallic surface of the floor. Alara instinctively stepped in front of Leora, her body tense and ready. Whoever had opened the door wasn't here to help, that much she knew. But instead of the harsh, armored figures of their scrathy captors, a man stepped into the doorway. A human man. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Leora's hand gripped her arm, fingers digging in as they both stared, wide-eyed, at the figure before them. He was tall, taller than either of them, with broad shoulders and a physique that spoke of both strength and agility. His dark hair was cropped close to his head, and his face, marked by a sharp jawline and weathered features, carried the hardness of someone who had seen his share of battles. He wore a suit of lightweight armor, black and tactical, though it was scuffed and dented from what must have been recent combat. In one hand he held a sleek, unfamiliar weapon, and strapped to his back was a pack filled with various tools and supplies. For a long moment, no one spoke. The man's eyes flicked between the two sisters, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if weighing the situation before him. Alara couldn't help but notice the brief flicker of surprise in his expression, as if he hadn't quite expected to find two alien women, at that in this place. "Who are you?" Alara's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, one that told the man she wasn't afraid to defend herself if necessary. He blinked, as if snapped out of his momentary hesitation. "My name's Michael," he said, his voice deep and clear. There was a subtle accent to it, something unfamiliar to the sisters. "I'm here to get you out." Alara exchanged a glance with Leora, who looked as bewildered as she felt. "Get us out," she repeated, suspicion creeping into her voice. "You're human." Michael gave a short nod as though that explained everything. "That's right. Human. I was hired for a rescue mission. I didn't expect." This he gestured toward the two of them. "But we don't have time to go over the details. This whole place is about to go up in flames." Alara's mind raced. Who was this man? A human, an actual living man, standing in front of her. She had read about them, of course, but only in the context of ancient myths, stories passed down from a time long forgotten. The idea that men had once existed, had once walked side by side with women. It had always seemed like a distant fantasy. Yet here he was, real and tangible, offering them a way out. "Why should we trust you?" Alara asked, her voice sharp, though the curiosity in her eyes betrayed her interest. "How do we know this isn't some sort of trick?" Michael's jaw tightened slightly, as if he didn't have time for this line of questioning. "Because if you don't come with me, you're going to die here. This ship is rigged to self-destruct, and we've got about 10 minutes before that happens. You can stay here and argue, or you can follow me and take your chances." Leora stepped forward before Alara could respond, her face lit with something that resembled excitement. "Let's go, Alara. What other choice do we have?" Alara hesitated. Everything about this felt wrong, too sudden, too unknown, but Leora was right. They didn't have a choice. The vibrations beneath their feet were growing stronger again, and the low rumble in the distance was unmistakably the sound of approaching destruction. With a curt nod, Alara stepped forward. "Fine, we'll go with you. But if this is a trap—" "It's not," Michael interrupted, already moving toward the corridor. "Stay close, and try not to get shot." As they stepped out into the corridor, Alara felt a rush of cold air against her skin. The metallic walls were dimly lit, and the floor vibrated slightly with the hum of machinery deep within the ship. It was a labyrinth of identical hallways, and without Michael they would have been hopelessly lost. Michael led them with a swift, confident pace, his weapon at the ready. Alara studied him as they moved, watching the way he scanned the corridor ahead with a soldier's precision, his movements fluid and purposeful. There was something about him, something different from anyone she'd ever known, not just because he was a man, but because he carried himself with an intensity that she couldn't quite place. Leora, for her part, was watching him too, though with an expression closer to awe. Alara could feel her sister's excitement radiating from her, the curiosity in her eyes as they trailed over Michael's every move. "Why are you here?" Alara asked as they turned a corner, her voice low enough so that it wouldn't carry beyond their small group. "Who sent you?" Michael didn't look back as he answered. "I was hired by a group of independent contractors, mercenaries like me. We get paid to handle extraction missions like this. High risk, high reward." "And you do this often?" Leora asked, her voice betraying her fascination. "Often enough," Michael replied, his tone neutral. "Though this is the first time I've had to break out a couple of alien princesses." Leora's eyes widened. "You know who we are?" Michael spared her a brief glance. It wasn't hard to figure out. Alara felt a surge of unease. If Michael knew they were royalty, it meant whoever hired him knew too. Their capture hadn't been random. Someone wanted them alive. Suddenly, a door up ahead slid open with a soft hiss, revealing two heavily armed Scrathy soldiers, their grotesque forms blocking the path ahead. Their armor was thick and black, insect-like in its design, and their beady eyes glowed a sickly yellow under their helmets. Michael didn't hesitate. Before the Scrathy could raise their weapons, he fired two quick shots from his blaster, each hitting their mark with deadly precision. The soldiers crumpled to the ground in a heap, smoke curling from the edges of their armor. "Keep moving," Michael said, his voice sharp as he stepped over the bodies and continued down the corridor. Leora let out a low breath. "I've never seen anyone move like that." Alara nodded silently, her mind racing. They had only just met this man, but already he had proven himself capable, deadly, and more importantly an ally. But there was still so much she didn't know, so much she couldn't trust. "Almost there," Michael said, turning into a wider passageway. "The hangar's just ahead. Once we're out of here, we'll regroup and figure out our next move." Alara opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat as a sudden explosion rocked the ship. The walls around them shuddered, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. Sparks flew from the ceiling, and the lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. The corridor plunged into chaos. "Move," Michael shouted over the din, grabbing Alara's arm and pulling her forward. Leora stumbled behind them, her eyes wide with fear. They sprinted down the corridor, the sound of alarms blaring in their ears. The ship was coming apart, piece by piece, the destruction drawing closer with every second. As they burst into the hangar, Alara's heart leaped into her throat. The bay was massive, filled with ships of every size and shape, but most of them were already in flames or reduced to rubble. Across the expanse, she spotted the sleek silhouette of a small, intact starship. There, Michael pointed toward it. "That's our ride." Together, they ran toward the ship, dodging debris and leaping over fallen beams. The floor beneath them shook violently, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. Michael reached the ship first, slamming his hand on the control panel to open the hatch. "Get in." Alara pushed Leora ahead of her, making sure her sister was safely inside before she followed. Michael was the last aboard, the hatch ceiling shut behind him, just as the entire hangar erupted in flames. The ship's engines roared to life, and with a jolt, they were airborne. Alara braced herself against the wall as they shot out of the hangar and into the void of space, the scrathy ship shrinking behind them. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines and the faint thrum of adrenaline still rushing through their veins. Finally, Leora broke the silence. "We made it." Michael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We're not out of the woods yet. But yeah, we made it." Alara sank into one of the seats, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. They had escaped thanks to this mysterious human man, but where would they go now? And who exactly had sent him? As she looked at Michael, seated across from her, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that their fate had just been tied to his in ways they couldn't yet understand. And in the cold, endless void of space, she couldn't help but wonder if this was only the beginning. The silence of space was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines as it drifted through the vast expanse of stars. Varella's twin princesses, Alara and Leora, sat quietly in the cockpit, staring out into the infinite blackness. The adrenaline from their escape had long since worn off, leaving behind an uneasy stillness that neither of them knew how to break. Michael sat at the helm, his broad shoulders hunched over the control panel, his face illuminated by the pale light of the ship's displays. His expression was one of quiet concentration, his movements measured and precise as he navigated the vessel through the empty stretch of space. For the first time since their capture, Alara and Leora were safe, but the tension in the air had only grown thicker. Neither of the sisters knew what to make of the human who had rescued them, this man who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere to pull them from the jaws of certain death. He was an enigma, a puzzle they were only just beginning to piece together. Alara watched him from her seat, her mind a swirl of thoughts and questions. Michael had been their savior, their protector in the heat of battle, and yet she knew almost nothing about him. His presence unsettled her, not just because he was a man and idea that had once seemed as mythical as the stars themselves, but because of the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to navigate life with such effortless strength and control. It was unnerving, and it intrigued her. Beside her, Leora shifted in her seat, her gaze locked on Michael as well. There was a barely contained energy in her, a restless curiosity that Alara had seen before in her sister, though this time it was different. This time it was focused on Michael, on the man who had saved them. Leora's fascination with him was palpable, her eyes tracing his every move, her thoughts no doubt racing with the same questions that plagued Alara's mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Michael broke the silence. "We should be out of Scrathy territory by now," he said, his voice low but clear. He didn't turn to look at them, his focus still on the controls. "We'll need to stop soon and find a place to refuel and restock. Somewhere off the radar." Alara leaned forward, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Do you know where we can go?" Michael nodded. "There's a neutral spaceport a few star systems over. It's not the safest place, but it's better than being out here in the open." Leora, who had been silent for most of the journey, finally spoke, her voice carrying a spark of excitement. "And after that, what happens then?" Michael glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "After that, we figure out what our next move is, but first we need to make sure no one's following us." Alara's eyes narrowed slightly. "No one knows where we are." "Not yet," Michael replied. "But we can't stay off the grid forever. The Scrathy will be looking for you, and if they find out you're alive," he left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. "They'll come for us again," Alara said, her voice tight with frustration. Michael nodded grimly. "You're valuable to them. They won't stop until they get what they want." Leora shifted in her seat, her expression darkening. "Why? Why do they want us so badly?" Michael's gaze flicked toward her, and for a moment, something unreadable passed across his face. "I don't know all the details," he admitted. "But from what I've gathered, it has something to do with your royal bloodline. They believe you're the key to unlocking some kind of ancient technology, something powerful." Alara felt a chill run down her spine. Ancient technology, the word sounded absurd, like something out of the legends Leora had been so fond of reading. But then again, what about their current situation wasn't absurd? Leora leaned forward, her curiosity getting the better of her. "What kind of technology?" Michael shrugged, his expression still guarded. That's the part one don't know. The Scrathi are tight-lipped about their plans, even among mercenaries. But whatever it is, it's big enough to be worth kidnapping you too, and risking an all-out war with the Varelian Empire. Alara's stomach twisted at the thought. War, it was the one thing their people had always sought to avoid. The very idea of conflict on that scale was unthinkable. And yet here they were, at the center of a brewing galactic storm, all because of something buried deep in their bloodline, something they didn't even understand. Why didn't you tell us this sooner? Alara's voice was edged with frustration. Michael looked at her then, his dark eyes meeting hers with a calm that bordered on unsettling. Would it have made a difference? Alara opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Would it have? They had been prisoners, helpless to do anything about their situation. Even now, as they sat aboard this small ship, free from the Scrathi's clutches, they were still running. Still powerless. No, she admitted quietly. It wouldn't have. Michael nodded once, then turned back to the controls. We'll be at the spaceport in a few hours. Get some rest while you can. Leora leaned back in her seat, her expression thoughtful. You make it sound like things are only going to get worse. Michael didn't respond, but the silence that followed was enough of an answer. The hours passed slowly, the weight of their uncertain future hanging over them like a thick fog. Alara tried to rest, but her mind was too active, too full of questions and worries. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the Scrathi ship, the cold, lifeless corridors, the faces of the soldiers as they had closed in on her and Leora. The fear, the helplessness, it all came rushing back in waves, refusing to let her find any peace. She finally gave up and wandered into the common area of the ship, a small, utilitarian space with a table, a few chairs, and little else. It was as unremarkable as the rest of the vessel, a far cry from the elegance and beauty of the palace on Varela. The comparison stung, reminding her just how far from home they really were. Leora was already there, sitting at the table with a distant look in her eyes. She had been quieter than usual since their escape, her usual boundless energy tempered by the weight of their situation. Alara watched her for a moment, wondering what was going on inside her sister's head. You're thinking again, Leora said suddenly without looking up. I can feel it. Alara sighed and sat across from her. I can't help it. There's too much to think about. Leora finally met her gaze, a small smile playing on her lips. You always think too much. And you don't think enough. Leora shrugged. Maybe. But right now I don't see what good thinking is going to do. We're in the middle of space, running from an alien race that wants to use us for some ancient relic or whatever, and we've got a human man, she said the word with an almost playful lilt, helping us because someone hired him. What part of that makes sense? Alara leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. None of it makes sense. That's the problem. Leora's smile faded, and she looked down at the table. Do you trust him? Alara considered the question carefully. I don't know, she said finally. He's helped us. He got us out of that ship, and he's keeping us safe. But I don't know him. We don't know why he's really here. Leora tapped her fingers lightly against the table, her eyes thoughtful. He's different, isn't he? Alara raised an eyebrow. Different. You know what I mean? Leora's voice dropped to a whisper, as if someone might overhear them. He's a man, Alara. We've never seen one before. Never even thought we would. But now he's right here and he's helping us. Doesn't that make you wonder? About the stories? About what we've been told? Alara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew what Leora was getting at, and it was a thought that had crossed her mind more than once since they had met Michael. Their whole lives, they had been raised in a society where men were nothing more than myths, forgotten relics of a distant past. Varela's history had long been purged of any trace of them, and even the oldest texts spoke of them only in vague, ancient terms. And yet Michael existed. He was real. Flesh and blood. And it was clear from the way he moved, the way he spoke, that he was not just some relic from the past. He was powerful, capable, dangerous in his own way. He was everything the stories had hinted at and more. I don't know what to think anymore, Alara admitted. But we can't let ourselves get distracted. He's helping us because someone hired him. That's all. Leora tilted her head, her gaze softening. You don't really believe that, do you? Alara opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, The door to the common area slid open, and Michael stepped inside. He paused for a moment, his eyes flicking between the two sisters, as if sensing the tension in the air. "We'll be at the spaceport soon," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "It's not the most welcoming place, but it'll do for now." Alara nodded, rising from her seat. "What can we expect when we get there?" Michael leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms over his chest. Neutral spaceports like this one attract all kinds: smugglers, mercenaries, traders. It's a place where no one asks too many questions, which makes it the perfect place to hide, but also a dangerous place if you're not careful. Leora stood as well, her curiosity piqued. "Will they know who we are?" "Not unless you tell them," Michael replied. "Just stay low, don't draw attention to yourselves, and we should be fine." Alara exchanged a glance with Leora. This was their first real step outside of Varelian space, their first time navigating a world where they weren't royal princesses, but fugitives on the run. The weight of that realization settled heavily on her shoulders, but there was no time for doubt now. They had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, or they would be caught again, and this time they might not escape. "All right," Alara said, her voice firm. "Let's get ready." The spaceport loomed ahead, a massive structure suspended in the void of space, its metal hull gleaming faintly in the light of distant stars. As Michael guided the ship toward one of the docking bays, Alara felt a knot of tension tighten in her stomach. This was it. Their first step into a new, unknown world. The ship landed with a soft thud, and Michael powered down the engines. The hum that had been their constant companion since they left the scratchy ship faded into silence, replaced by the distant clatter of activity outside the walls of the ship. "Stay close," Michael said, standing up and strapping on his blaster. "This place isn't friendly." Leora flashed him a grin, her eyes alight with excitement. "I like a little danger." Michael smirked but didn't respond. He led them toward the exit, the hatch hissing open with a soft sigh. As the three of them stepped out onto the dock, the first thing that hit Alara was the smell, a mix of engine fuel, sweat, and something burnt, all mingling in the thick, artificial air of the port. The spaceport was massive, a sprawling maze of walkways, docking bays, and market stalls, all bustling with activity. Every corner was filled with people, humans, aliens, and species Alara had never even imagined, all moving about with the purposeful energy of those who lived their lives on the fringes of the galaxy. "This place is incredible," Leora whispered, her eyes wide as she took it all in. "Incredible or not, we need to be careful," Alara said, though she too couldn't help but feel a strange thrill at the sight of so many different beings in one place. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, so far removed from the elegant, orderly world of Varela that it almost felt like stepping into a dream. Michael moved ahead of them, his gaze scanning the crowd. "We'll head to a trader I know. He'll have supplies, and he can help us get a new ship. Something that won't attract as much attention." Alara nodded, keeping close to him as they wove through the crowd. Leora, on the other hand, lingered a step behind, her gaze darting from one stall to the next, her curiosity barely contained. As they passed a group of merchants haggling over parts, one of them a hulking alien with gray skin and a twisted snarl spotted Leora. He leered at her, his voice a guttural growl. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this?" Leora's eyes flashed with anger, but before she could respond, Michael stepped in front of her, his hand resting on the blaster at his hip. "Keep walking," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The alien's eyes narrowed, but he took a step back, clearly not interested in starting trouble. "Just a joke," he muttered, turning back to his stall. Michael turned to Leora, his expression hard. "I told you to keep a low profile." Leora rolled her eyes, though there was a hint of unease in her voice. "I can handle myself." "Not here. You can't," Michael snapped. "This isn't Varela. People don't play by the same rules." Alara stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "Let's just focus on what we came here for. We don't need any more trouble." Michael glanced at her, his jaw tight, but he nodded. "Fine. Let's go." As they continued through the spaceport, Alara couldn't help but feel the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. They were no longer princesses of a peaceful empire, they were fugitives, adrift in a galaxy that was far more dangerous and unpredictable than they had ever imagined. And though Michael had gotten them this far, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. Because the galaxy didn't care about their royal bloodline, their titles, or their heritage. Out here, they were just 3 people trying to survive. And survival, it seemed, was going to come at a cost. The spaceport felt like it was holding its breath. The steady thrum of engines, the faint crackle of comms chatter, and the ever-present clamor of merchants hawking their goods all faded into the background, replaced by an oppressive silence that wrapped around Alara like a cold shroud. She could feel it in the air, the weight of something coming, something dangerous. Her instincts, honed through years of royal training and sharpened by the perilous events of the past few days, screamed at her that their time here was running out. Michael had led them deep into the belly of the spaceport, through a series of twisting alleyways and dimly lit corridors, until they reached a small, nondescript building nestled between 2 towering structures. The trader he had mentioned, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a suspicious demeanor, had reluctantly agreed to sell them the supplies they needed: fuel, rations, and most importantly, access to a ship that could get them out of the system unnoticed. But something was wrong. Alara could sense it even before Michael finished haggling with the trader. The air felt too still, the shadows too deep. She exchanged a glance with Leora, who stood beside her, fidgeting with a strand of her hair. Leora's excitement at being in the bustling, alien-filled spaceport had long since faded, replaced by the same gnawing unease that clung to Alara. Michael finally turned back to them, a grim look on his face. "We've got what we need. The ship's in Dock 7. We need to move fast." "Why?" Leora asked, her voice low but sharp. "What's wrong?" Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Alara to know that her suspicions had been right. "There's been some chatter on the comms. The Scrathi are in the system. They're looking for you." Alara felt her heart skip a beat. How did they find us so quickly? "They've got resources, contacts," Michael said, his voice tight. "It was only a matter of time before they tracked us here. We've still got a window to get out, but it's closing fast." Leora's eyes widened in alarm. "So we're leaving now, right? Like right now?" Michael gave a sharp nod. "We don't have a choice. If they catch up to us here, there won't be another escape." Alara felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. They had barely escaped the Scrathi once, and that had been with the element of surprise on their side. This time there would be no such advantage. The Scrathi were relentless, driven by a singular purpose to capture them and unlock whatever ancient power lay dormant in their bloodline. "Let's go," Alara said, her voice steady despite the growing tension inside her. "We can't waste any more time." The 3 of them moved quickly, slipping out of the trader's shop and into the crowded passageways of the spaceport. The air was thick with the scent of fuel and sweat, and the din of activity pressed in from all sides. Michael led the way, his hand hovering near the blaster on his hip, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Alara and Leora stayed close behind, their senses on high alert. Alara could feel the weight of every pair of eyes that lingered on them, every passerby who seemed to take too much interest in their movements. The paranoia was suffocating, but she couldn't afford to let it cloud her judgment. They reached Dock 7 without incident, and for a brief moment, Alara allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would get out of this alive. But as they approached the ship, a sleek, silver vessel with smooth, angular lines, a group of figures stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. Alara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the Scrathi soldiers. There were 4 of them, their insect-like armor gleaming under the dim lights of the dock. They stood rigid, their glowing yellow eyes fixed on the trio with cold, unblinking intensity. Behind them, a 5th figure emerged from the shadows, a Scrathi commander, his black armor more elaborate than the others, adorned with sharp, angular designs that gave him an almost regal appearance. His eyes were different from the soldiers, colder, more calculating. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he was in control. "Princess Alara." "Princess Leora," the commander said, his voice a smooth, oily purr that sent a chill down Alara's spine. "You've been difficult to track down, but the hunt is finally over." Michael's hand shot to his blaster, his body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. But before he could draw, the Scrathi commander raised a hand, and the soldiers behind him leveled their weapons, sleek, dark rifles that hummed with a dangerous energy. "Don't," the commander warned, his voice calm but laced with menace. "I would hate for this to turn violent." After all, we're not here to harm the princesses. Quite the opposite, in fact. We're here to return them to their rightful place. Leora's face twisted with disgust. Our rightful place? You mean locked up on some scrathy warship so you can use us as your personal key to power? The commander smiled, a thin, cruel smile. You misunderstand, princess. We don't seek to harm you. We only wish to unlock the potential that your bloodline carries. The ancient power that sleeps within you, it's the key to the future of the galaxy. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard rumors of this power, whispered stories passed down through generations of Varelian royalty, but she had never believed them. It had always seemed like a myth, a relic of a long-forgotten age. But the Scrathi believed. They believed so strongly that they had risked everything to capture her and Leora. Michael stepped forward, his expression hard as steel. We're not interested in your plans. Step aside, or this will end badly for you. The commander's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold amusement. You think you can stop us, human? You're outnumbered, outmatched. Your bravery is commendable, but ultimately futile. Michael's hand hovered over his blaster, his eyes locked on the commander. You want to find out how futile it is. Alara could feel the tension mounting, the air crackling with the threat of violence. They were cornered, outnumbered, and with every passing second, the Scrathi were closing in. There was no way out, no way to fight their way past the soldiers, no chance to escape. But then, something shifted inside her. A strange, electric sensation pulsed through her veins, faint at first but growing stronger with each passing moment. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, a raw, primal force that seemed to awaken from deep within her. She glanced at Leora and saw the same realization dawning in her sister's eyes. They weren't powerless. They had never been powerless. Michael, Alara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Get ready. Michael shot her a quick, confused glance, but he didn't argue. His hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, his body tense and ready for whatever was about to happen. The Scrathi commander raised his arm, his soldiers preparing to fire. And then, in an instant, everything exploded into chaos. Alara didn't fully understand what happened next. One moment she was standing frozen in front of the Scrathi soldiers, and the next, a surge of energy erupted from her, a blinding flash of light that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. The power that had been dormant inside her, the ancient force that the Scrathi had been so desperate to unlock, was now fully unleashed. The soldiers were thrown back, their weapons clattering to the ground as they struggled to regain their footing. The commander staggered, his cold composure shattered as he stared in disbelief at the two sisters, his eyes wide with shock. Leora's hands were raised, her fingers crackling with the same raw energy that coursed through Alara. The air around them shimmered, charged with an almost magnetic force that distorted the space around them. You don't understand what you're doing, the commander hissed, his voice trembling with barely concealed rage. This power, it's not meant for you to control. Alara took a step forward, her heart racing with adrenaline, her senses alive with the new energy coursing through her. Maybe not. But it's ours. The Scrathi soldiers, disoriented but not defeated, began to regroup, their weapons raised once again. But this time, Alara wasn't afraid. This time she knew what she had to do. Leora, she said, her voice steady. Together. Leora nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. In perfect sync, the two sisters unleashed another wave of energy, a shock wave that ripped through the dock with unstoppable force. The Scrathi soldiers were flung backward, their armor cracking under the pressure. The commander barely had time to react before the ground beneath him splintered, sending him crashing to the floor. Go, Michael shouted, pulling out his blaster and firing at the nearest Scrathi soldier. Get to the ship. Alara and Leora sprinted toward the vessel, their hearts pounding, their newfound power still pulsing through their veins. The dock was in chaos, smoke and debris filling the air as the Scrathi forces scrambled to recover. Michael covered their escape, his blaster firing in rapid succession, each shot taking down a soldier with deadly precision. The Scrathi, despite their numbers, were no match for his skill, and soon enough, they were retreating, regrouping for another assault. But there wouldn't be time for another assault. Alara and Leora reached the ship just as Michael joined them, the hatch sliding open with a sharp hiss. They scrambled inside, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they collapsed into the seats. Michael wasted no time, throwing himself into the pilot's seat and firing up the engines. The ship roared to life, and with a deafening blast, it shot off the dock, rocketing into the sky and leaving the Scrathy forces behind. For a few tense moments, the only sound was the rush of the ship's engines as it tore through the atmosphere, pushing them further and further away from the spaceport and the danger that had nearly swallowed them whole. Alara sat back in her seat, her heart still racing, her body still humming with the strange, unfamiliar energy that had saved their lives. She glanced at Leora, who looked equally stunned, though there was a spark of exhilaration in her eyes that Alara couldn't help but share. They had done it. They had tapped into the power that had been buried deep within them, the ancient force that had been the source of so much mystery and danger. But now that it was unleashed, Alara knew their lives would never be the same. Hours later, after they had put a safe distance between themselves and the Scrathy, Michael turned to face them, his expression unreadable. What the hell was that, he asked, his voice low and calm, but edged with something that sounded like awe. Alara exchanged a glance with Leora, who simply shrugged, a small, tired smile on her face. "We're still figuring that out," Alara said quietly. "But I think we just found the key to fighting back." Michael nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on them both. "Well, whatever it was, it just saved our lives." Alara looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from the aftershocks of the power they had unleashed. She didn't know what this power meant, or how they were supposed to control it, but one thing was certain. They were no longer just two princesses on the run. They were something more. Something the Scrathy and the galaxy would soon come to fear. And for the first time since their journey began, Alara felt a glimmer of hope. They were not powerless. They had the strength to fight back. And this battle was far from over. The starship soared through the void, a solitary vessel navigating the endless expanse of space. Inside, the tension that had filled the air after their escape from the Scrathy forces was finally beginning to ease, but it had been replaced by something else, an unspoken, lingering uncertainty that weighed heavily on the three occupants of the ship. Alara sat quietly in the common area, her gaze fixed on the stars as they streaked past the viewport. Her mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, churning with everything that had happened. The battle at the spaceport, the sudden unleashing of the mysterious power within her and Leora, and the looming threat of the Scrathy, all of it seemed to swirl together, a chaotic whirlwind she could barely keep up with. Beside her, Leora was equally silent, her usual restless energy subdued for the first time since they had left Varela. She had always been the more impulsive of the two, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had discovered. The power they had unlocked wasn't just a fleeting force, it was something ancient, something that had been lying dormant within them, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now that it had, there was no going back. Michael's footsteps echoed softly in the corridor as he entered the room, his presence grounding the sisters in the present. He had been quiet since their escape, focused on navigating the ship to safety. But Alara had noticed the way his eyes lingered on them, the way his expression had shifted when he saw the power they had unleashed. He was no longer just their protector or guide. He was something more, a witness to their transformation. As he sat across from them, the silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. Leora was the first to break it, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. "Do you think this power has always been inside us?" Alara glanced at her sister, wondering the same thing. Their lives had always been shaped by their royal duties, their place in Varelian society as future rulers, but never had they imagined that their lineage carried something more, something that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. If the Scrathy believed you were the key to unlocking something ancient, it must have been there all along. But why it's only awakened now, that's the part one don't understand. Alara nodded slowly, her mind racing. She remembered the stories Leora had spoken of, the ancient myths about men and the lost history of their people. Could those legends have been warnings, clues to a power that had been hidden away for generations? Leora sighed, her expression torn between wonder and fear. "It feels like we're part of something much bigger than we ever thought. Like everything we've been told about our world, our history. It's all just the surface." Michael studied them both for a moment, then spoke, his voice steady. "Whatever this is, it's dangerous. The Scrathy are going to keep coming after you. They're not just after your titles or your status, they're after the power you have." Alara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had known from the moment they escaped the Scrathy ship that they would be hunted, but now the threat felt more immediate, more personal. This power inside her and Leora, it wasn't just a gift. It was a target. "What do we do now?" Leora asked, her voice uncharacteristically small. Michael didn't answer right away. His brow furrowed in thought as he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "We find a way to control it. To use it before the Scrathy get their hands on you again." Alara's gaze dropped to her hands, which still felt warm from the residual energy coursing through her veins. How were they supposed to control something they didn't understand? The power had erupted from them in moments of desperation, but beyond that, it was a mystery. "I don't even know where to begin," Alara admitted quietly. "We don't know anything about this power or how to wield it, and even if we did, how could we use it without losing ourselves?" Michael met her gaze, his eyes intense. "You won't lose yourselves. You'll learn to control it together." His confidence, though quiet, had a way of steadying her. Michael had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, there was a certainty in his tone that Alara found herself relying on more and more. Despite everything that had happened, being captured, escaping, discovering their power, Michael had remained their anchor, keeping them grounded in the present. Leora leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Michael with an intensity that was impossible to miss. "You really believe that?" Michael held her gaze, unwavering. "I do." For a moment the room was filled with the soft hum of the ship's engines, the weight of Michael's words sinking into the silence. Then, without warning, Leora smiled a soft, almost wistful smile that caught Alara off guard. "It's funny, you know," she said, her voice light. "I used to dream about what it would be like to meet someone like you." Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "Like me?" Leora shrugged, her smile growing a little wider. "A man. You're the first one we've ever met, after all. I used to imagine what it would be like, what men would be like. Strong, mysterious, maybe a little dangerous. I never thought I'd actually meet one, let alone. Well." Alara felt a strange heat rise to her cheeks as she realized where Leora was going with this. Her sister had always been more open with her emotions, more willing to explore the unknown, but this was different. This was personal. Leora's gaze shifted between Alara and Michael, her tone becoming more serious. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been thinking. About what comes next. About what happens after all of this. What if we don't go back to Varela? What if we make a new life somewhere else, somewhere far away from the Scrathy, from the Empire, from everything we've ever known?" Alara's eyes widened. "Leora." But Leora wasn't finished. "I mean it, Alara. What if we don't want to be princesses anymore? What if we want something more than just duty and responsibility? What if we want a life of our own?" Michael watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. Alara felt her heart racing, torn between her sister's words and the weight of the responsibility that had been drilled into her for her entire life. She had always known that one day she would ascend to the throne, that she and Leora would rule together, maintaining the peace and prosperity of Varela. But the thought of walking away from all of that, of choosing a different path, was terrifying. And yet there was a part of her that wondered, what if? What if they didn't go back? What if they could choose a life that was their own, a life free from the expectations of their people? But that was a fantasy. A beautiful, dangerous fantasy. "Leora," Alara said, her voice soft but firm, "we can't just walk away from everything. Our people need us. The Scrathy are still out there, and the Empire needs to be strong." Leora's smile faded slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "I know," she said quietly, "but it doesn't hurt to dream, does it?" Michael shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. "You both have a responsibility to your people," he said, his voice measured. "But that doesn't mean you can't decide what your future looks like. You don't have to let this power define you, and you don't have to let your titles control you." Alara looked at him, her heart pounding. He spoke with such conviction, such certainty, and she couldn't help but feel drawn to the idea of a different life, a life that wasn't ruled by duty or tradition. But she also knew the reality of their situation. They were royalty, bound to their people by birthright, and that wasn't something they could simply walk away from. Still, there was something in Michael's words that stirred a deep longing within her. and as she looked at him, she realized that it wasn't just the idea of a different life that drew her in, it was him. Michael had become more than just their protector. He was someone she had come to rely on, someone she had grown to trust, and perhaps in another life he could have been something more. But before Alara could dwell on the thought, the ship's comm system crackled to life, shattering the quiet tension in the room. Incoming transmission, the ship's AI announced in a flat, emotionless voice. Michael stood quickly, moving to the control panel to answer the call. Alara and Leora exchanged a glance, the moment broken as the weight of their situation returned to the forefront of their minds. The transmission was brief, coded coordinates from a distant ally, a woman Michael had contacted before they escaped the spaceport. She was part of a resistance group operating in the outer fringes of the galaxy, a group that had been quietly working against the Scrathi for years. And now she had agreed to meet them. "It's a rendezvous point in neutral space," Michael explained after the transmission ended. "It'll be safer there, and we can regroup, figure out our next steps." Alara nodded, her mind already shifting back into the mode of strategy and planning. "How long until we get there?" "About 6 hours, if we push the engines." "Then we don't have time to waste," Alara said, rising to her feet. "We need to be ready for anything. The Scrathi won't stop, and neither can we." Leora stood as well, though her expression was more somber. "I guess that means we're not running away after all." Alara gave her sister a small smile, understanding the mixture of emotions behind Leora's words. "Not yet," she said softly, "but maybe one day." Michael turned to face them both, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You've got a fight ahead of you. It's not going to be easy, but you're not alone. We'll face this together." For a moment, the three of them stood there in silence, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. They were no longer just allies brought together by chance. They were something more, connected by the trials they had faced and the battles they had fought. Alara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And though the future was uncertain, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Because even in the darkest moments, they had found strength in each other and in themselves. And that, Alara realized, was the key to their survival. The hours passed quickly, the quiet hum of the ship's engines lulling them into a sense of calm as they neared the rendezvous point. Alara sat in the cockpit beside Michael, watching as the stars streaked past the viewport. Her mind was still racing with everything that had happened, but for the first time in what felt like days, she allowed herself a moment of peace. Beside her, Michael was focused on the controls, his expression calm and collected. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a weariness that came from the weight of the battles they had fought. "You've been through a lot," Alara said quietly, breaking the silence. Michael glanced at her, his expression softening. "So have you?" Alara smiled faintly. "It feels like everything has changed so quickly. One minute we were just princesses living in peace, and now we're in the middle of a war we didn't even know existed." Michael nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "That's how it goes sometimes. Life has a way of throwing you into the deep end when you least expect it." Alara looked at him, her heart heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Do you ever wish you could go back to a simpler time?" Michael considered the question for a moment before shaking his head. "No. I've learned that you can't go back. All you can do is move forward, take what you've learned, and keep fighting." Alara felt a swell of admiration for him, for the way he faced every challenge with such quiet strength. He had become more than just a man to her. He was someone she trusted, someone she cared for deeply. And though she knew they still had a long journey ahead of them, she couldn't help but wonder if one day they could find a life beyond the battles. A life where they could be more than just allies, more than just survivors. A life where love, not duty, defined their choices. But for now there were still battles to be fought, and Alara knew that the fight for their freedom was far from over.